Roger Williams University is hosting a crisis management seminar on May 3rd at their Providence campus. Crises, whether a natural disaster, cyber attack, or financial instability, can have severe repercussions if not handled properly. This is where crisis management plays a pivotal role. Join Roger Williams MBA students and expert speakers to learn how to prepare for the unexpected. The program is totally free and open to the public. You can register online at rwu.edu/events/crisis-management-symposium. Welcome back into the Bartholomew Town Podcast special report on Rhode Island's housing crisis. Conversations with advocates and people who understand the ins and outs of this crisis all week long. And today, a really, really important conversation with Kris Brown of the United Way and also the Land Use Commission on understanding zoning and understanding the soulfulness and the human element of what goes into this crisis and why we need to resolve it. So I appreciate all of the feedback that I've gotten on this series. There's much more ahead all throughout the course of this week. And we're going to continue to examine this from all different perspectives. But again, today, Kris Brown here on the Bartholomew Town Podcast.
This is the Bartholomew Town Podcast.
All right, so this conversation right now is one that is in many ways kind of the culmination of the theme of many of the other conversations we've had on this week-long special report. Some of the interviews that you'll even hear later this week that have already been recorded, and just in general, something that I think those of us who pay attention to housing and all of these issues understand. And that is, quite frankly, zoning and land use and figuring out how are we going to build more housing and how are we going to think about housing differently in terms of occupancy, in terms of the facility, and the role that that facility can play. So joining us right now is somebody who is, without question, right in the thick of this area, and that is the United Way's Kris Brown. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for having me, Bill. Happy to be here.
So as I alluded to there in that impromptu opening, the notion of zoning is so critical. And look, there are a lot of things at play here. It can include short-term rentals. It can include developing in more rural areas where there's a tendency to want to keep the identity, so to speak, of the rural zone, but also like building 3-family instead of 2-family homes. There's so much to this. Give us your sort of 36,000-foot view on the state of zoning in Rhode Island right now and its impact on the housing crisis overall.
So yeah, zoning is one of the key issues that we face right now. And under the leadership of the speaker with the Land Use Commission, we've been really digging into the ins and outs of how our zoning and land use regulation has inhibited or in some cases prohibited our ability to develop new housing, and not just new housing, but a diversity of housing options, which I think is critical to underscore here. We do see some units being built and getting through the regulatory processes that are zoning and land use, but those are largely large single-family homes, tend to be on the luxury side, tend to be, coastal vacation homes, second homes, and those are not what is meeting the needs of our population right now, and that's not what is needed going forward. So let me just unpack, what is zoning, right? Let's just start there. So zoning is our laws that govern what is legal to build. It covers all types of development, but for this conversation, we'll stick to residential development, right? Housing. We have a regulatory structure where the state laws enable a framework for our local governments to control what gets built. That's called home rule. We're a home rule state. So the real decision-making is in the hands of our municipal governments. So what we're looking at now in the commission and in other places in this issue, and this isn't Rhode Island alone. All of our neighboring states are dealing with this. Zoning reform is happening across the country. It's even being looked at by the Biden administration and the federal government. We need to change our pattern of development, which has largely enabled single-family detached houses on very large lots. We are the smallest state in the country. We're a coastal state. We have various constraints on what we can develop. We also have the third oldest housing stock in the country, and many of our municipalities are considered built out, right? But what is built out? Built out means that municipalities have zoned specific areas for residential development, and right now there already exists housing on those parcels of land. But we have a housing crisis, right? And as the speaker said when you interviewed him recently, we have a supply and demand issue. We have a demand for more housing units, and we do not have enough. What complicates that even further is we have an aging population. We have older residents living in very large single-family homes that used to house, 4 to 6, maybe 8 people. There's now only 1 or 2 people living in those homes. Why is that? It's because we haven't been building smaller, denser, affordable, and accessible units for them to downsize it. And that's sort of the crux at what zoning limits and how this has exponentially exacerbated our housing crisis.
It's that, first of all, that was extremely well summarized. So anybody who's like looking to share that topic with anybody can just like chunk out that segment right there and just play it, because that was extremely well described. But look, it's so true. And there's this notion that, look, there's NIMBYism, there's just a fundamental identity aspect, which I think when you consider certain rural aspects you can understand, you can empathize with. And frankly, there are even issues where it's like, do you really want to overcrowd certain existing areas that are already overcrowded? I think Central Falls right now, where there is development going on, and we heard on a podcast earlier this week about a reduction in parking spots for more units. So there's ways to navigate this, but what's the big challenge here? What you have to deal with 39 different cities and towns, but like, what's the one thing, if there is one, that seems to blockade us moving forward in a way that would really meet the needs of our state's population?
Well, I wish it was as simple as one thing. It's really not. And there's no one thing that I can really point to eliminate this crunch. We have the need to reform our framework at the state level, which is happening with the Land Use Commission. We need to, incentivize and support local municipal governments to plan for growth, to plan for housing development. We've come through a almost 30-year period of trying to really contain and stop sprawl in our zoning and regulatory environments. But what that has led to is a sort of attitude of like, don't build anything anywhere. And that is not serving us. We see the impact of that all over the state. And I want to be clear that creating a new framework or reforms at the state level, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's not doing anything that is, going to, impact rural communities and make them build what they cannot build. There's still all of these structures in place. We have DEM regulations that regulate, how a development impacts wetlands, water and sewer, capacity. We have many checks and balances on what we can develop. And what I think the general impetus is, or the call to action is, we need every community to look at what they have available and what could be used for housing in a different way, in a creative way. It is a moment for change and creativity. some of the ideas that I'm very excited about that have been discussed at the Land Use Commission are looking at our transit corridors and our commercial corridors. I don't know about you, but I know that where I live, if I'm driving, to go shopping or groceries, to the grocery store or wherever, I'm passing block after block of outdated strip mall building environment, building stock.
Totally. Yep.
Right. And what would that look like if we really took a creative lens to it? It's 2023. We know there are millions of ways to develop buildings, mixed use buildings, mixed income buildings. What if we were to change the zoning in those areas to allow residential development?
Makes so much sense.
It makes sense. And it's actually the smartest way to grow when we are faced with issues like climate change, flooding along our coastal communities, and other issues. We have transportation access on those corridors. In most cases, we have underutilized industrial buildings, light industrial and commercial, that are frankly not well maintained and not adding, anything to our built environment, right? It's time to update. It's time to bring in the services and meet the needs of our residents and allow us to grow.
Such a big piece of this is the mixed use and sort of, like you said, creative approach to things. I don't want to toot my own horn here or whatever, but I've lived in New York in converted pickle factories, active hummus factories, churches, you name it. And right now I'm in a mixed use building, one of just a few artist work live buildings in Providence. And I'm always amazed that people aren't more willing, and I think people are willing to, but people in terms of zoning decision makers. I look at Newport where there's abandoned schools. There's all kinds of places that you could instantly start to develop housing that could also then solve other challenges of space that's specifically needed by innovators, by creatives, by, different types of businesses. I mean, whatever the case may be. And it's like, it's 2023. Yeah. You look at the amount of strip malls, or even quite frankly, malls that are either abandoned or on the verge of, and you're like, who's going to go there in 10 years? Like, let's be honest about Providence Place. Like, what is that? I'm sure that, they're getting huge incentive or based loans and via tax incentives. And you wonder, like, what is that place in 10, 15 years? And what it could be is an awesome place to live. Right.
Right. We need to think that way. And frankly, we're behind most of the rest of the country in thinking about our land and development patterns in this way. And a critical piece of that is going to be our municipalities and having them actually think about what is possible and also incentivizing growth. And they can't do it alone. There is staffing and capacity issues. We've certainly heard that over and over again. At the Land Use Commission and testimony. And so the work that's being done at the state and the Land Use Commission, what kind of incentives can we offer, and how can we meet in the middle ground and start to address this confluence of issues, the housing crisis and the climate crisis, our Act on Climate goals. Like, these are all stacking up at the same time. And this is a moment for us to really look at these systems and make well-informed changes. Where we are right now, we're a little late to the game in making some of these reforms, but that is actually to our advantage because our neighboring states and certainly states across the country have been experimenting with making zoning reforms, and we've seen how certain ones have played out, and we can actually reap the benefits of lessons learned elsewhere to make smart reforms.
Yeah, big time. And also, there's a uniqueness and an intersectionality here in Rhode Island that is, there's been I wish we had the numbers on this. It's probably available if you really dug in, but I don't think you would even necessarily be able to get it exact. But how many people now that previously lived in, let's say, Boston or New York, now live in Rhode Island and work in either a remote or hybrid context? And what does that do to the housing stock? How does that diminish the housing stock? Because their salary is based on a New York or Boston position and versus a Rhode Island position. So how do we square that? It's not to say that people shouldn't come here, but we're uniquely positioned right now as what could become this sort of either bedroom community or sort of outpost, if you will, for larger cities. And, you know, that's a factor as well, because it can drive industry and it can, there's an intersectionality aspect to it there. But if you simply either don't have the housing stock, or if those folks take the housing stock and then go and spend money in Boston, you know, you're kind of quadrupling down on other problems here as well.
For sure. So, you know, we have seen over the pandemic a massive influx of, you know, home buyers from New York and Boston come into our market. We unfortunately don't have the best data on what's happened since then. You know, my instinct and my personal experience anecdotally, like some people have decided to stay in the buildings or homes that they've bought during the pandemic and work remotely. Others have decided to go back to where they came from, and now they're a landlord in our community. They're renting out that home, or they're renting out that triple decker because it's generating income for them, and they can go back to the metropolitan area that they came from. That has deeply impacted our housing market in so many ways, but obviously, you know, we've seen an almost 24% increase in rents in the Providence metro area, almost 14% statewide. You know, we've seen the highest median sales price for a single family home and a multifamily home than we've seen. You know, it spiked so quickly, and we don't really have the data on how that's going to impact, you know, other than what we do know is, you know, this extreme increase in homeless population, a massive increase in evictions for non-payment of rent, and the displacement of working Rhode Islanders who want to stay here and have to stay here for many reasons, or don't have the option to leave. This is just the beginning, honestly. You know, we have seen this in San Francisco and Boston, Seattle, you name it. If we don't make smart zoning and land use reforms now that do enable the appropriate housing development in our state, we are going to continue to price Rhode Islanders out. And we are going to continue to have a rise in homelessness and the social issues and the expense that comes along with that.
Yeah, it's a stark warning and a real one, and it's time for people to pay attention to it. And many people are. People is a very generic term, but you know, it's gone to a point right now where there's a depression element as well. You know, I'm a millennial. I have a number of friends who are hardworking. Either they have their own business, they work a 9-to-5, they work a million side hustles, whatever the case may be. They can't buy a house.
Yeah.
It's that simple. And what's happening is you have the unraveling of community because, oh, this person is going to, you know, Montana, and oh, this person's going to go live in, X, Y, and Z place. And all of a sudden, 2-3 years after this process plays out, what once seemed like a vision for a lifetime of a new generation of Rhode Islanders, perhaps raising families together, sharing experiences together, backyard fires in the summertime, sharing holiday experiences together, that gets destroyed.
It does.
And you end up alone, looking out the window, wondering what happened. And that is a crisis in and of itself as well, that you're going to have a generation of lonely people whose community is destroyed because of the fact that zoning and production of housing and frankly wages is not in a place that it needs to be, and it should be on a moral ground. And we don't talk about morals a lot. We use data We don't use feelings. I'm using feelings. It's not
Mhm.
right. What kind of world do you want?
I agree with you. And that's the question we really need to ask ourselves right now, Bill. Like, what future do we want? What type of Rhode Island do we want? What type of community do we want? And I couldn't agree more because I've experienced that personally as well. Several of my close friends have had to leave. I know a lot of folks my age and younger who are struggling with their housing costs. Some who make far more money than I do, but are still renting and have seen their rent increase so much, they're actually questioning what they're doing, and they can't find homes to buy either. And it does have this ripple effect. And, we are an aging state, and our aging Rhode Islanders who are out of the workforce now are living in the single family housing stock that would, if we had places for them to downsize it, would potentially become available for people like us or our friends who want to start families to move into. And because we have no diversity of housing options throughout the lifespan, we do not have that mobility within our own communities. And it is something that every city and town needs to think about. Are you offering the type of housing that your residents need to downsize? Are you letting your older residents just languish in unsafe housing conditions because they can't maintain their old, expensive house to a standard that makes it livable? What happens to a community when you have no families with children come in? You start to see more and more vacant schools. This is a ripple effect that comes back to, well, you can't build multifamily housing most places in our state because it's zoned for single family housing. And I'm not talking about high rises, right? I'm talking about even like small multifamily, duplexes, townhouses, triple deckers, 3 units. We need a diversity of housing stock to make our communities livable so that we do have community cohesion, so we can grow old with our friends and see our friends' kids, have multi-generations of families. I've spoken to a lot of older residents who are very concerned because their children and grandchildren are housing insecure and they can't live in Rhode Island. And what's that leading to? That's leading to many people either leaving the state or really doubling up into multi-generational households. That's not sustainable. We all know that from a personal level, that's not sustainable for most people. But the time is now. The time is now to make these changes. And what I want to say to your listeners is that if you care about this issue and you want to see more housing options in your community, it is critically important that you talk to your city or town councilors. It's critically important that you tell how this is impacting you at the local level. And the work that's being, the work that's being done at the state level needs the support to continue, right? Needs constituent support to continue examining these laws and making good proposals to try to change things.
Completely agree. And getting engaged is something that is hard to do. And, but when it's a personal experience, it's the right thing to do. And hey, look, I call on these municipal bodies, city or town councils, to not dismiss these concerns or tokenize them.
Yeah.
Like, be the ambassador that you're supposed to be for your community, first and foremost, on these issues. And when we talk about, moving forward with as a state in terms of just the connection, the human connection, I go back to this idea of like, nothing else really matters.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's what matters. The experience that we have, the shared experience, like, that's really what matters. Like, that should drive our policies, not the interests of a few. And the people say, well, that's not the way the real world works, Bill. Don't you realize, there's money to be made. There's powerful interests at play. That's just not the way it works. Well, then let's change it.
Right.
Let's change the way the world works. What does that look like? I don't know. Does it mean protesting in the streets, et cetera, et cetera? Maybe, probably not. Probably what it means is exactly what you're saying, chipping away at policy on the municipal level. It's not as much fun as some of the things that grab headlines, but that's really where it probably lives right now.
And, all of those municipal leaders, they are beholden to their residents, and they need to hear from more diverse voices on this issue and why it's important, because it is important right now for a huge swath of Rhode Island's population, of all income levels, of all ages. And it is critical that we continue to make these changes now so that we have a chance at sustaining communities, so that some of our coastal communities don't become just completely second homes for other people from other places. The risk is great right now, and the trajectory we are on is not sustainable. We need to make meaningful changes right now.
Kris Brown, United Way, Land Use Commission, just a soulful person with a real understanding of this issue. And that was a powerful conversation. And I know that some of the people who are listening to this are probably like, yeah, we know this. And I hope that some people listened to this and said, I've never really thought of it that way. And I think a targeted advocacy and activism by citizens is essential right now, and it can work. And I don't know what else we can do. It makes me so sad.
Yeah.
Like it's so depressing, and psychologically it psychs me out so much. Like it makes me like, oh, where am I? What's happening? Like,
yeah,
the world spins. I've been through this in Brooklyn, where my community was destroyed by Airbnb.
Yeah.
All of a sudden it was like, oh, instead of having these artist lofts, let's, rent 7 or 8 of them because, you inherited money or you have some crazy job or whatever, and let's turn them into Airbnb. 2 years later, community destroyed. I went to Newport, community there. Amazing. Saw myself buying a house, the whole thing. Guess what?
Yeah.
Airbnb comes in. See you later. People move out. They can't afford to live there. No one can buy a house. Now people in that community, same in Providence.
Yeah.
Now I'm in Providence. I find my footing. People can't afford to live here. It's that simple. Like and if you can afford to live here, you're doing it in a way that's either super innovative and you're making sacrifices. You're living with like 15 people.
Right.
And you get to the point where people are like, and look, the unhoused crisis is incredibly important. It makes me so depressed. It makes me so sad. And it's like, we've got to attack that full speed ahead, but it doesn't stop there. It's a full spectrum issue, and both sides are equally as important. Now you can make an argument, well, if someone's sleeping outside in the cold, it's not as important as you and your friends being able to grow old together. Okay. But you can walk and chew gum at the same time.
Yeah, and it's all connected. It's all literally the same problem. We don't have enough housing units to meet the needs of the people who are here, who have chosen to be here. And that includes the people who are neighbors who are experiencing, homelessness, to people who are just, trying to work and live and develop relationships and community. It's a whole lifespan. It's the whole spectrum. And we really need to figure out how to develop smart, resilient housing so that we can stabilize our communities, and people who have chosen Rhode Island as home can continue to be here.
Bingo. The legalization of recreational cannabis that went into effect last year can open doors for your career. If you are already in the industry or wondering what is the best path to break into the cannabis field, well, the University of Rhode Island has a program to help you become highly competitive in numerous areas of the cannabis industry. Fully accredited by URI's College of Pharmacy, The certificate program is 100% online, and it can be completed in 2 semesters. The next application deadline for the summer 2023 session is April 4th, and courses start on May 9th. You can learn more at uri.edu/online/cannabis or give them a call at 401-874-5280.
At HealthSource RI for Employers, we provide access to health insurance to more than 1,100 local businesses and nonprofits, and 96% of them renew through us every year. Maybe it's our choice of 19 different health plans, our 10 years of customizing solutions, or our one local team of dedicated experts helping employers find quality health insurance. See how our numbers stack up for you. Learn more at healthsourceri.com/employers.